It was a sticky, hot summer day when Jacob disappeared. I remember it so clearly because that was the last day anything felt normal around here. Jacob lived just a few houses down from me, in that old, beat-up house on the corner of Maple and Fifth. We weren't close friends or anything, but we'd wave at each other when we passed by. He was one of those guys who kept to himself, didn't cause any trouble. The kind of person you'd barely notice unless he was gone. And then it was strange from the start. His car was still parked in his driveway, right where it always was. His lawn, which he usually kept neat, had started to grow out, like he hadn't been home for days. The lights were off, and his mailbox was full. At first, no one thought much of it. People go on trips, right? Maybe Jacob had gone camping or something. But a week passed, then two, and still no sign of Jacob. His car hadn't moved. The front door was locked. The curtains were drawn. That's when his neighbor, Mrs. Henson, started getting worried. She knocked on his door a couple of times, but got no answer. Eventually, she called the police. They came out, broke the door down, and went inside. I remember standing on my porch, watching them with this uneasy feeling in my gut. It was a small town, you know? Stuff like this didn't happen here. Cops searched the house for hours, and by the time they came back out, they had nothing. No sign of Jacob. His wallet, phone, and keys were all there. No broken windows, no signs of a struggle. It was like he just up and vanished. People in the neighborhood started talking. The usual stuff. Maybe he ran away. Maybe he had some secret life none of us knew about. But that didn't make sense. Jacob wasn't that kind of guy. He was quiet, yeah, but he was steady, reliable. The kind of guy you'd count on to water your plants if you went on vacation. The police put up missing posters, started questioning people around town. They came to my door too, asked if I'd seen anything strange. I hadn't. Nothing unusual ever happened around here. Days turned into weeks, and the cops stopped coming around. The town moved on, but something about Jacob's disappearance stuck with me. Maybe it was the fact that no one had any answers, or maybe it was just how quiet everything got after he was gone. You start noticing things when something like that happens. Like how no one really knew anything about Jacob. He didn't have any family that anyone could remember, no close friends. He was just Jacob, and now he wasn't. For a while, people tried to act like everything was fine. Probably just skip town, they'd say. But we all knew better. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Turns out I was right. A couple weeks after Jacob vanished, Becca went missing too. And that's when everything started to feel off. Becca wasn't just some quiet guy like Jacob. She was the kind of person everyone knew, always full of energy, always smiling. She worked at the corner store, and if you'd ever bought a pack of gum or grabbed a soda in this town, you'd met her. She was the one who'd crack a joke or ask how your day was going. And you know what? She actually cared about the answer. I saw her the day she disappeared. I was picking up a few things, milk, bread, the usual, and Becca was behind the counter, chatting away with some old guy about the weather, like she always did. She smiled at me when I walked in, gave me a quick, "Hey Sam, how's it going?" Same as every other day. I joked about the heat and how she must have had the best job in town, hanging out in air conditioning all day. She laughed, that loud, contagious laugh of hers, and told me I could switch places with her anytime. That's the last conversation I ever had with her. The last conversation anyone had with her. The next day, the store was closed. I figured maybe Becca called in sick or something, but when I saw her car still parked outside the store and no lights on inside, that's when I got that same sick feeling in my stomach. That feeling I'd had when Jacob went missing. The kind you can't shake. No matter how much you try to convince yourself it's nothing. By afternoon, people were talking. Becca hadn't shown up for work. She hadn't called anyone. She wasn't answering her phone. I texted her once just to check in, but I didn't get a response. Later that evening, the police showed up again, just like they did with Jacob. They checked her apartment above the store, searched the whole place. And guess what? Same story as Jacob. Her car, her phone, her wallet, everything was there. Just like she'd be back any minute. Except she wasn't. Becca was gone. People started getting nervous. I mean, two people don't just disappear like that, right? I overheard my neighbor, Mr. Donnelly, talking to his wife that night. He was trying to calm her down, but I could hear the fear in his voice too. Maybe she just took off, he said. People do that sometimes, right? Becca? She wouldn't just leave, his wife shot back. She was always here, always talking about her plans for the store. Why would she just leave without saying anything? That was the thing about Becca. She wasn't the type to just up and vanish. She had roots here. People knew her. People cared about her. The next few days were tense. The whole town felt it. The usual friendly conversations between neighbors turned into hushed whispers. People didn't want to admit it, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Something was wrong. First Jacob, now Becca. This wasn't a coincidence. But what could we do? The police were doing what they could. So they said, but it wasn't enough. We still had no answers. The strangest part was that there was no sign of struggle at all. No forced entry, no broken windows. Just like with Jacob, it was as if Becca had simply walked out the door and never came back. That didn't sit right with me. Becca wasn't reckless. She wouldn't just disappear like that. A couple of days after her disappearance, the town started forming search parties. People were too freaked out to just sit and wait for the next person to go missing. I joined in, even though I wasn't sure what we were supposed to find. I guess, deep down, I didn't think we'd find anything. We combed through the woods on the outskirts of town, looked around abandoned buildings, and knocked on every door, hoping someone might know something we didn't. We found nothing. That's when the fear really set in. When we came back empty-handed, people started locking their doors, double-checking the windows at night. I heard some folks talking about moving away, at least until they figured out what was going on. I remember standing in the middle of the street that evening, looking up and down, and realizing how empty it felt. Normally, you'd see kids riding bikes, neighbors watering their lawns, cars driving by. But that night, there was nothing, not even the sound of crickets. It was like the whole town had gone into hiding. I called Mike that night. He'd been part of the search too, and I could tell he was just as freaked out as I was. You think this is connected to Jacob? I asked him, pacing around my living room. There was a pause on the other end before he answered. It's gotta be, man. Two people don't just vanish like that. Someone's gotta be behind this. Yeah, but who? And why? I don't know, but it feels like something's coming. I don't like it. Neither did I. And the worst part? Deep down, I had the sinking feeling that whatever was coming, it wasn't going to stop with Jacob and Becca. It was just getting started. When Becca disappeared, it hit different. People were already spooked after Jacob vanished. But Becca, she was part of the community, the kind of person you just assumed would always be there. So when she went missing, folks couldn't just sit around anymore. That's when the town came together and organized a search party. It was a hot Saturday afternoon, the sun burning down on us as we all gathered in the park. You could feel the unease in the air. Normally, this place would be full of families, kids playing on the swings, people laughing. Not that day. It was dead quiet except for the murmur of nervous conversations. Sheriff Haynes stood on a bench, trying to give us a pep talk, but it wasn't exactly inspiring. He was a big guy in his late 40s, but you could tell he was rattled like the rest of us. This wasn't the kind of thing he signed up for when he took the job. We're gonna split up, he said, his voice cracking through the tension. We'll cover the woods, the old train tracks, and any of the abandoned buildings on the edge of town. If you see anything, you report back immediately. No one goes wandering off alone. He said that last part like we were a bunch of kids heading into a haunted house. But truth was, that's what it felt like. Everyone was nervous. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but we all knew that Jacob and Becca weren't just lost. This wasn't about finding them sitting under a tree with a broken leg. This was something worse. I was paired up with my buddy Mike. He lived a few streets over, and we'd grown up together. He was one of the only people I could really trust. We were given the section near the woods, the thick patch of trees on the outskirts of town where kids used to hang out and smoke when we were younger. As we headed out, the trees seemed to close in around us, swallowing the sounds of the town until it felt like we were the only ones left in the world. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. I could hear Mike breathing next to me, heavy and nervous. You feel that? He asked, looking around like he expected someone to jump out at us. It's too damn quiet. I did feel it. There was something unnatural about how still everything was. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves. Just silence. I kept thinking about those old horror movies we'd watch as kids, the ones where the silence was always the sign that something bad was about to happen. We walked for what felt like hours, but it was probably just 20 minutes. The further we went, the worse that feeling in my gut got, like something was watching us from the trees. At one point, I stopped and turned around, sure I'd seen something move out of the corner of my eye. But there was nothing, just shadows. Mike must have seen me tense up because he stopped too. "Sam, what is it?" I shook my head. "Nothing. I thought I saw." I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound paranoid. "Never mind. Let's keep going." We kept moving deeper into the woods, calling Becca's name every few minutes, though both of us knew it was pointless. Mike wasn't saying much, but I could tell he was freaked out too. His eyes kept darting around, like he expected to see something lurking in the trees. I felt it too, that strange pressure in the air, like we were being watched. I couldn't shake it. "Man, this is nuts," Mike finally said, breaking the silence. "People don't just vanish like this. First Jacob, now Becca. What the hell is going on?" I shrugged, not knowing what to say. I've been asking myself the same question for days. It felt like we were living in a bad dream. One of those nightmares where everything looks familiar, but nothing makes sense. We kept walking, following the old dirt path that cut through the thickest part of the woods. Mike started talking again, more to fill the silence than anything. He was trying to convince himself, and me, that there had to be a reasonable explanation for all this. That maybe Jacob and Becca had just taken off, that maybe they were together somewhere. But we both knew that wasn't true. You don't leave everything behind without a trace. Not without telling someone. Not like this. After a while, we reached a clearing. The trees opened up, revealing an old, abandoned shack. I hadn't seen it in years. It used to be a place where the local teenagers would hang out, drink, and pretend to be tough. Now it just looked wrong. The paint was peeling, the roof sagged, and the windows were dark and lifeless. I got that sinking feeling in my gut again. "We should check it out," Mike said, though he didn't sound too thrilled about the idea. I didn't want to go inside, but there was no way I was going to back down in front of Mike. So we walked up to the door, which hung slightly open, creaking in a breeze that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Inside, it smelled like mildew and rot. The floor was covered in dirt and leaves that had blown in over the years, and the walls were lined with graffiti from who knows how long ago. The light filtering in through the cracks in the roof gave the place an eerie glow, casting long shadows that made it hard to tell what was real and what was just our imaginations. I was about to call out Becca's name again when Mike stopped in his tracks. "Hey, Sim, look at this." I turned and saw him kneeling next to something on the floor. It was a shoe. A woman's shoe, caked with mud and torn on one side. It looked recent. My stomach twisted. "Do you think?" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. We both stared at the shoe for a long moment, the weight of what it meant sinking in. Becca had been here, or maybe someone who wanted us to think she had. Either way, this wasn't good. I pulled out my phone to call the sheriff, but just as I was about to dial, Mike grabbed my arm. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" I froze, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of our breathing. But then, faintly I heard it, a rustling like something moving in the woods outside. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be the wind. My heart pounded in my chest as we both stood there, frozen, listening. The sound stopped. Then suddenly it started again, louder this time. Closer. "Let's go," I whispered, grabbing Mike's arm and pulling him toward the door. We bolted out of that shack and back down the path as fast as we could, not daring to look back. When we finally made it back to the park, the others were already gathering, their faces pale, their voices hushed. Mike and I didn't tell anyone about the shoe. Not yet. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, to admit what we both knew deep down. Becca wasn't coming back. Neither was Jacob. And whatever was out there, it wasn't finished. After that day in the woods, things got worse. It wasn't just the disappearances anymore. It was something deeper, something you couldn't quite explain. People were on edge, jumping at every little noise, and no one was willing to be outside once the sun went down. I'd never seen the town so quiet at night. Normally, you'd hear crickets, cars in the distance, the usual night sounds. Now, it was like everything was holding its breath. But it wasn't just the quiet that got to me. It was the whispers. It started with just a few people, neighbors, friends, talking about hearing strange sounds at night. I remember overhearing Mrs. Henson, the same woman who'd called the cops when Jacob went missing, whispering to someone at the grocery store. I heard it last night again. A voice like someone was calling my name. I swear it was Jacob's voice. The other woman tried to calm her down, but I saw the look in her eyes. She believed Mrs. Henson because she had heard it too. And honestly, so had I. The first time it happened, I thought I was just imagining things. It was late, probably close to midnight. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to get the sound of that rustling from the woods out of my head. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shack, saw the shoe Mike and I had found. That creeping feeling that something, or someone, had been watching us from the trees wouldn't leave me alone. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Soft, barely louder than the sound of the wind, but I was sure of what I heard. Sam. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. The voice was outside, right under my window. My first instinct was to look, but something stopped me. Something in the back of my mind screamed not to move, not to make a sound. I sat there, frozen, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of my own breathing, ragged and fast. Then it came again, a faint whisper, but clearer this time. Sam, come outside. It was the voice of a woman. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. It sounded like Becca, but that didn't make sense. It couldn't be her. Becca was gone. I knew that. Deep down, I knew she wasn't coming back. But for a split second, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that maybe she was out there, waiting for me. That maybe everything we thought we knew was wrong, and all she needed was for me to open that window and let her in. I almost did it. I actually reached out to pull the curtain aside when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump. It was a text from Mike. You hearing that? I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. He was hearing it too. That meant it wasn't just in my head. Whatever this was, it was real. My mouth was dry, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second before I typed back. Yeah, it's outside. A minute later, my phone rang. It was Mike. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. You're hearing it too, right? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The voice? Yeah, man, Mike replied. I could hear the fear in his voice, that same fear that was clawing at my chest. It's Becca's voice. I swear it's her. It's not her, I said, though part of me wasn't sure. It can't be. There was silence on the line for a few seconds before Mike spoke again. You think it's like, I don't know, someone messing with us? Or maybe we're just losing it. I didn't know what to say. None of this made any sense. All I knew was that we were both hearing the same thing, and whatever it was, it wasn't right. I don't know, Mike, but whatever you do, don't open the window. He didn't respond at first, but I heard him take a deep breath on the other end. I wasn't planning on it, he finally said. But man, what if it's them? What if they're trying to get back? Trying to tell us something? Don't. I repeated, more firmly this time. Just don't. After a long pause, Mike agreed, and we ended the call. But the whispering didn't stop. It kept going, just outside my window, soft but insistent, calling my name again and again. Sam, come outside. We need you. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, listening to the whispering fade in and out until it eventually disappeared with the first light of dawn. When the sun finally came up, the voice was gone, leaving me with nothing but the memory of those chilling words. The next day, I tried to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The whispers had crossed a line. Whatever was going on wasn't just about missing people anymore. It was about something bigger, something darker. People were talking less now, avoiding eye contact, keeping to themselves. Even during the day, there was a heaviness in the air. Mike and I didn't talk about what happened that night. We both knew we weren't the only ones hearing things. The whole town was, but no one wanted to admit it. A few days later, I ran into Mrs. Henson again, this time at the post office. She looked rough, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she had that far-off look like she was stuck in her own head. They won't stop, she whispered to me, glancing around like she was afraid someone might hear. At night, they call for me. They want me to come outside. I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to tell her? That I heard them too? That I had no idea what was happening either? Instead, I just nodded, trying to keep my own fear from bubbling up to the surface. Don't listen, I told her. Whatever they say, don't listen. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. But what if they need help? What if they're trying to tell us something? They're not, I said firmly. It's not them. I didn't know if I believed that, but I had to. I had to, or I'd go crazy thinking about it. Because if those voices really were Becca and Jacob, then why weren't they coming back? Why were they just whispers in the dark? And deep down, I knew the answer. Because they weren't really Becca and Jacob anymore. And whatever they were now, I didn't want to find out. I knew I shouldn't have gone out that night, but I was running low on groceries and things were starting to feel suffocating inside my own house. After everything with the whispers, I had barely left the house except for work. The quiet tension in the town had become almost unbearable. But I couldn't live like that forever, hiding away from something I didn't even understand. So, I figured I'd make a quick run to the store, grab what I needed, and be back home before dark. That was the plan, at least. It was around 6 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. The store was emptier than usual, just me and the cashier, a young kid who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. I hurried through the aisles, throwing what I needed into my basket: bread, milk, cereal, whatever would last me a few days. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease that had settled over the town since Becca vanished. It was hard not to think about it when every corner felt like a shadow waiting to grab you. When I got to the checkout, the kid didn't say much, just nodded and bagged my stuff, eyes darting nervously toward the windows. I guess he was feeling it too, the tension that seemed to settle into your bones once the sun started going down. As I left the store, stepping out into the warm evening air, I noticed how quiet it was. The streets were practically deserted. A few lights flickered on in the houses along the main road, but not a single person was out walking, not even the usual dog walkers or joggers. It was like the whole town had started a nightly curfew. Everyone knew better than to be out once the sun disappeared. Except for me, apparently. I slung the grocery bag over my shoulder and started walking back home, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. The whole way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You know how sometimes you just know someone's looking at you, even if you can't see them? That was it. Every step felt heavier, like something was right behind me, breathing down my neck. I quickened my pace, my heart starting to race. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was the stress of everything, the whispers, the disappearances, the fact that nothing made sense anymore. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. And then I heard it. Footsteps. At first I thought it was just an echo of my own, but no. These were heavier, slower, deliberate. I stopped, right in the middle of the sidewalk, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps behind me stopped too. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I swallowed hard and turned around slowly, bracing myself for something. But there was no one there. The street was empty. Just rows of houses, some dark, others lit by the soft glow of porch lights. A few trees swayed in the breeze, but there wasn't a soul in sight. But I knew what I heard. The footsteps. They were real. I stood there for a moment, frozen, scanning the shadows, looking for movement. Nothing. It was so quiet I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. Then I turned back toward my house, which was still a few blocks away. And that's when I heard it again. Whispers. Not like before, not calling my name this time. No, these whispers were different. It was a low murmur, like someone or something was talking just under its breath, just loud enough for me to know it was there, but not loud enough for me to make out the words. The sound seemed to come from all around me, like it was coming from the very air itself. I couldn't take it anymore. My body went into full panic mode. I tightened my grip on the grocery bag and started running, my feet pounding against the pavement as fast as they could carry me. I didn't care how it looked. I didn't care if anyone saw me. I just needed to get home. The whispers followed me, growing louder. And then the footsteps came again, this time faster, matching my pace. Whoever or whatever, it was right behind me, keeping up no matter how fast I ran. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, my legs burning as I pushed myself harder. My house was just a couple blocks away now, so close. But the whispers, they were almost in my ear, like they were right next to me. Sam, you can't run. I nearly screamed. My lungs burned and my vision blurred as I rounded the last corner, my house coming into view at the end of the street. I fumbled for my keys, already digging them out of my pocket as I sprinted up the driveway. The whispers were louder now, hissing and crackling like static. Come back, come back. I reached the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I glanced behind me one last time, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing, just shadows. I threw the door open, slammed it behind me, and locked it. My chest heaved, and I pressed my back against the door, sliding down to the floor. My hands were trembling so bad I dropped the keys. My heart was racing, and I struggled to catch my breath, listening for any sound outside, any hint that someone might have followed me. But there was nothing. The house was dead quiet. No footsteps, no whispers. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heartbeat. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm myself down. I didn't move until I was sure the whispering was gone, until the tension in my body slowly started to fade and my breathing steadied. What the hell had just happened? I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, my back pressed against the door, as if that alone would keep whatever was out there from getting in. Eventually, I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked to the window, careful to peek out just enough to see the street. Nothing. It was empty. No movement. No strange figures hiding in the shadows. Just the quiet, sleepy town I'd always known. But it didn't feel like that anymore. I closed the curtains, every muscle in my body tense. I knew I wasn't imagining things. Something had been following me. I heard it. I felt it. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every little sound, every creak of the house settling made me jump. I stayed up, sitting in my chair by the window, staring out into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. The whispers didn't come back. Not that night, but I knew they would. And the next time, I might not be able to outrun them. The morning after my close call, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. My heart skipped a beat, that familiar dread creeping back in before I even opened my eyes. I half expected it to be another text from Mike, like the one he'd sent the night before when we'd both heard those damn whispers. But this time, it wasn't a text. It was a call. I glanced at the screen. Sheriff Haynes. My stomach dropped. Cops don't call you this early in the morning unless something's seriously wrong. I sat up, already feeling the weight of whatever bad news was coming. Hello. I answered, my voice groggy. Sam, it's Haynes. Have you heard from Mike? That question hit me like a punch to the gut. I immediately knew where this was going. Know why? What's going on? We got a call from his neighbor early this morning. Lights were on at his house, his truck still in the driveway, but Mike's not answering his door. He's missing. Those last words sent a cold shiver down my spine. Mike, my best friend, gone just like Jacob and Becca. The panic hit me instantly, the kind that tightens your chest and makes it hard to breathe. No, that can't be. I stammered, getting out of bed and pacing the room. I talked to him last night. We both heard the whispers again. He said he was staying inside. He promised. Haynes let out a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Look, Sam, I know this is hard, but we need your help. I'm getting the search party together. We're going to Mike's house first. I need you to meet us there. I'll be there, I said, already grabbing my jacket. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't like the other searches. I wasn't sure we'd find Mike. I got to Mike's place in record time, my heart pounding in my chest the whole drive. His house looked the same as it always did. Lights on inside, truck parked in the driveway. But something was off. It was too still, too empty. The front door was closed, but I could see through the window that the living room was a mess. Mike was never the neatest guy, but this was different. Chairs were knocked over, books scattered across the floor. The search party was already gathered outside when I arrived. Sheriff Haynes was there, along with a few other people from the town. People I recognized, but their faces were grim, like they'd already accepted the worst. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken fear that had gripped the town ever since Jacob disappeared. Haynes nodded at me as I walked up. "We've checked the house, Sam. No sign of him. No struggle, no broken windows. Same as the others." The others. That phrase hit hard. It wasn't just Jacob or Becca anymore. It was Mike now, too. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to speak. Did anyone hear anything? See anything strange? Haynes shook his head. Neighbors didn't hear a thing. One of them said they saw his lights on late, but that's it. No noise. No sign of a break-in. It's like he just vanished. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process it all. This was Mike. He was smart, cautious. He knew something was wrong, and he wasn't the type to take risks, not after everything that had been happening. I kept thinking back to our last conversation, how scared we both were, how we'd promised each other we wouldn't go outside. Not for anything. But Mike was gone. The search party split up just like before, and we headed out. I was with Haynes and a couple of others as we combed through the woods near Mike's place. The trees seemed darker, more ominous than usual, and every little sound made my skin crawl. My mind kept replaying those whispers I'd heard the night before. Sam, come back. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not even Mike. Because the truth was, it wasn't just the whispers themselves that scared me. It was the fact that, deep down, part of me had wanted to listen. Part of me had felt drawn to the voice, like it was pulling me in, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. We walked through the woods, calling Mike's name over and over, but I knew he wouldn't answer. After what felt like hours, we regrouped, all of us empty-handed. No sign of him, just like the others. Haynes called off the search for the day, and we all headed back to our cars in silence. But as I walked to my car, I caught something out of the corner of my eye, something on the ground near the edge of the woods. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was Mike's jacket. I rushed over, my heart racing, and picked it up. There was no mistaking it. It was the same jacket he'd been wearing the last time I saw him, the same one he wore all the time. But why was it here, half buried under a pile of leaves, like someone had just tossed it aside? I looked around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive stillness of the woods, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the jacket. It was cold, damp from the morning dew, but there was something else, something tucked into the pocket. I reached inside and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded up neatly. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Inside, written in Mike's messy handwriting, were 4 words. I know the truth. My heart nearly stopped. What truth? What had Mike figured out? And why hadn't he told me? Suddenly, everything made sense. The whispers, the disappearances, the strange pull I'd felt that night. Mike had been onto something. He'd figured out what was really happening, and it had gotten him taken. I stuffed the note into my pocket and stood up, glancing around like someone might be watching me. The woods felt different now, more sinister, as if they were hiding something. Something I wasn't meant to find. I wanted to tell Haynes, but I hesitated. What could I say? That I found Mike's jacket in the woods with a cryptic note? That wouldn't help. Not yet. Not until I knew more. I went home that night, my mind racing, replaying every conversation I'd had with Mike over the past few weeks, trying to figure out what he had discovered. But there was one thing I knew for sure now. These weren't random disappearances. They were connected, and Mike had been close to the truth. Close enough that something or someone had taken him. That night, I sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, waiting for the whispers to come back. And as I sat there, Mike's last words kept echoing in my mind. I know the truth. But the real question was, did I want to know it too? Or was it already too late? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Mike's note was burned into my brain. I know the truth. Those 4 words looped in my head until the early hours of the morning. I kept turning them over, trying to figure out what they meant. What truth? How could he have known something and not told me? We'd been through this whole mess together. But now Mike was gone, just like Jacob, just like Becca. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. But it didn't last long. A loud knock on my front door jolted me awake. My heart raced as I scrambled out of bed, still half asleep, the adrenaline pumping through me again. I glanced at the clock. It was 7:15 a.m., too early for visitors, especially after everything that had been going on. I threw on a shirt and headed to the door, my stomach twisting in knots. As I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated. For a second, I considered not answering. But then the knock came again, louder this time. Reluctantly, I opened the door. There was no one there, just the empty street, the soft light of early morning making everything look eerie and still. I stepped outside, scanning the area for any sign of movement, but nothing seemed out of place. And then I saw it, a plain white envelope sitting on my doorstep. I bent down and picked it up, my fingers trembling as I turned it over. No name, no return address, just a blank envelope. It felt too light, like there was barely anything inside. My gut told me this was wrong, really wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I went back inside, shut the door, and carefully tore open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, and on it, scrawled in messy handwriting, was one simple sentence. Stop looking. You don't want to know the truth. My blood ran cold. The paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. The handwriting wasn't Mike's. It was different, jagged, rushed. Whoever wrote this wasn't trying to scare me. They were warning me. I stood there for a minute, staring at the note, trying to make sense of it all. I didn't want to believe it, but it was starting to feel like I was in way over my head. First the whispers, then Mike's disappearance, and now this. Whoever, or whatever, was behind these disappearances, they knew I was getting close. But close to what? I had to think. I grabbed the note and shoved it into my pocket, pacing the room as my mind raced. What did they mean by the truth? Mike had written almost the same thing before he disappeared, but now someone else was telling me to stop. But I couldn't just let it go. Not after everything that had happened. I owed it to Mike, to Becca, to Jacob. I needed answers. I decided to check out Mike's place again. Maybe I missed something the first time, something that could give me a clue about what Mike had figured out before he vanished. I drove over as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest the whole way. When I got to Mike's house, it felt like a ghost town. His truck was still in the driveway, just as it had been the day he disappeared. The front door was locked, but I knew where Mike kept his spare key, under the loose brick by the porch. We'd known each other too long for me not to know that. I fished the key out, my hand shaking as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air inside the house was stale, thick with the tension of things left unfinished. His living room was still a mess, just like it had been the first time I came by after he went missing. But now, in the silence, it felt different, like the house itself was waiting for something. I started in the living room, looking through the papers scattered on the coffee table. Bills, grocery lists, nothing that stood out. Then I moved to the small office in the back of the house. Mike wasn't much for paperwork, but he had a desk there, a place where he kept random things. I rummaged through drawers, old receipts, some notebooks. Nothing useful. Frustration started to settle in. I was about to give up when something caught my eye, a small flash drive, half hidden under a pile of old mail. It was one of those cheap ones, the kind you'd get for free at a conference or something. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There was no label, no writing. It was just there. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was what Mike had been hiding. I took the flash drive and bolted out of the house, heading straight home. My mind was racing again, trying to piece together whatever this could be. When I got home, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, holding my breath as I waited for it to load. There was only one file on it, an audio file, simply labeled Listen. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a second, nerves getting the best of me. But I had to know. I clicked it. At first, all I heard was static. Then, slowly, a voice emerged from the noise. Mike's voice. So if you're hearing this, then something's happened to me. I don't have much time, so listen carefully. I think I've figured out what's going on. It's not what we thought. This isn't just some random thing. Something is behind this. It's all connected. The disappearances, the whispers. I know it sounds crazy, but they're using the whispers to draw people in, to make them go. I don't know how, but it's real, Sam. It's real, and they're getting closer. I felt my stomach drop. Mike had known more than he let on. His voice sounded rushed, scared. He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath before continuing. They'll come for you next. That's why you need to stop looking. They don't want us to know the truth. They want us to disappear. I've seen it. They're not human, Sam. They look like us, sound like us, but they're not. Don't trust anyone. Don't go outside when you hear the whispers. Don't. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving nothing but static. I sat there, stunned, staring at the screen as the weight of Mike's words sank in. "They're not human." That phrase echoed in my mind. What did he mean? I felt my heart racing again, my pulse pounding in my ears. I thought about the letter, the warning. You don't want to know the truth. But it was too late. I knew now, and I couldn't stop looking. I closed the laptop, running a hand through my hair, trying to think, trying to make sense of what Mike had said. Whatever was behind this, it wasn't just random. These whispers, these disappearances, they were deliberate. And if Mike was right, they weren't done yet. I didn't know who, or what, was behind it all, but I had a feeling I'd find out soon enough. And now that I knew the truth, I was next. After listening to Mike's recording, I sat frozen at my desk, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a vice. My brain was spinning. Everything was starting to connect. The whispers, the disappearances, the warning in the letter. The thought that kept hitting me over and over was the one thing I didn't want to believe. They aren't human. I didn't know what to do next. My first instinct was to run. But run where? If what Mike said was true, if these things could look like us, sound like us, they could be anywhere. They could be anyone. And worst of all, I had no idea how long I had before they came for me. The sun had just started to set, casting a dim, orange glow through the blinds. I couldn't shake the feeling that once darkness fell, something would happen. Something bad. My phone buzzed on the table next to me, making me jump. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart pounded as I opened it. "Come to the woods. Alone. You'll find your answers." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It could have been a trap. Hell, it probably was a trap. But if I didn't go, I knew I'd never find out the truth. Not the whole truth. And whatever this was, it was too late to back out now. I was already too deep. Grabbing a flashlight and a jacket, I left my house without thinking twice. The night air was cool, the streets eerily quiet. As I drove to the woods, the only sound was the hum of the car engine. No whispers yet, but they'd come. I knew they would. The woods were the same place Mike and I had searched before, where we found that abandoned shack. That place had always given me the creeps, but tonight it felt different, darker, heavier. Like the trees themselves were watching me. I parked at the edge of the road and stepped out, the flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness as I walked into the trees. Every step felt like it was dragging me further from safety, deeper into something I wasn't sure I could escape from. The shadows seemed to dance at the edges of my vision, and every rustling leaf made my heart jump. And then I heard it. Sam. The whisper. It came from up ahead, barely audible, but unmistakable. My blood ran cold, and I stopped in my tracks, shining the flashlight into the trees, searching for the source. Nothing. Just darkness. Come closer. It was louder this time, the voice sounding more human than before. It was almost familiar. I swallowed hard and pushed forward, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run. But I couldn't. I had to know. The path twisted deeper into the woods, and the trees began to close in around me, their branches reaching out like claws. I heard the whispers again, this time all around me, echoing through the trees. Sam, you shouldn't have come. My pulse quickened as I stumbled forward, the flashlight flickering in my hand. Then just ahead I saw the old shack. Its rotting walls and sagging roof were even more decrepit than before. But something was different now. The door was open. A soft light flickered from inside, like candlelight. My breath caught in my throat as I approached, the whispers swirling around me, growing louder with each step. I could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on me, pulling me toward the open door. I stepped inside. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for a summer night. The shack was empty, save for a single table in the center of the room. On the table was a piece of paper, and next to it, an old cassette tape recorder. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved toward the table, my hands trembling. The piece of paper had a few lines of scribbled handwriting. It was Mike's. "They're here. Don't trust what you see. Don't trust anyone." I stared at the note, my mind spinning. What did he mean? Don't trust anyone? What was I supposed to do? Before I could think too much, the door creaked behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my flashlight flickering as it caught the outline of a figure standing in the doorway. My stomach dropped. It was Mike. He was standing there, looking at me with that same calm expression he always had. His clothes were dirty, his face pale, but it was him. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, as if waiting for me to speak. "Mike," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Is it really you?" He didn't answer right away. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "It's me, Sam," he said, his voice soft. But something about it felt off. It was Mike's voice, but not quite. It was like a shadow of what it used to be. I took a step back, my hands shaking. "Where have you been? What's happening?" "You disappeared, Mike. You left." "I didn't leave, Sam," he said, taking another step forward. "I found the truth." There was a chill in his words, something that sent a shiver down my spine. Everything about him felt wrong. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it was like he was trying to be Mike but couldn't quite pull it off. Then I remembered Mike's last words from the recording. "They're not human." My heart started pounding harder, and I took another step back. "You're not Mike," I said, my voice shaking. You're one of them." The thing pretending to be Mike tilted its head slightly, a twisted smile creeping onto its face. "Sam, you shouldn't have come here. I warned you. You should have stopped looking." My blood ran cold. The whispers, his whispers, grew louder, filling the air around me, choking me. I stumbled backward, the flashlight flickering in my hand. "Run, Sam," it said, its voice no longer Mike's. "Run before it's too late." But I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the thing that wore my best friend's face. My mind racing as I tried to understand what I was seeing. Mike had been taken, changed, just like Jacob, just like Becca. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been turned into whatever this was. Then it lunged at me, moving faster than I could have imagined. My survival instincts kicked in, and I turned and ran, sprinting out of the shack and back through the woods as fast as my legs could carry me. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more frantic, until it felt like they were right in my ear. "You can't run, Sam. You belong to us now." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept running, branches slapping my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I finally broke through the tree line and collapsed next to my car. The woods were silent now. The whispers were gone. I looked back at the dark forest, my body trembling with fear. Mike's words echoed in my mind. "They're not human. Don't trust anyone." I knew then that whatever had taken him, whatever had taken Becca and Jacob, wasn't finished. It was coming for me too. And no matter how far I ran, how deep I tried to hide, it wouldn't stop. Because I had found the truth. And now it would never let me go.